Hey Renee, are you familiar with the email to direct people to send in questions?
Yeah, you're just going to send directly to me, right? Shaw at KT.
Yes, Chris will be sending them to you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I've got 2 devices ready to receive just in case
Yes.
one goes down.
And if you
Okay.
don't mind to make an announcement at the start, just that folks can send it to townhall@lexingtonky.gov.
I got it. Okay, sure will.
Thank you so much. We are now live.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first of 3 town hall meetings by the Commission for Racial Justice and Equality. My name is Renee Shaw, and I'm the managing producer, editor, and host of Kentucky Educational Television's Public Affairs programs. And I'm honored to be here tonight with this illustrious panel who's put in a lot of work and a lot of effort to bring about some positive, substantive, and transformational change to Lexington. This tonight is our focus is on racial equity, education, and economics. And we invite you to be a part of that conversation as well. We want you to send your questions to townhall@lexingtonky.gov. Email at townhall@lexingtonky.gov. And if you probably go to the website, you can also see that address there. And please send us in your questions. We can answer what's really on your minds and help this committee and others move their work forward. So at this time, without delay, we're going to turn it over to the co-chair of the commission, Rosalind Akins, who's going to give us the purpose of tonight's meeting and give us some introductory remarks. Ms. Rosalind.
Thank you, Renee. Let me say on behalf of Dr. Gerald Smith and I, we are humbled to serve as the co-chairs, the overall co-chairs for the mayor's Commission on Racial Justice and Equality here in Lexington. So let me introduce by giving you the purpose of the Mayor's Commission is to assemble diverse community members to listen, discuss, and create empowering solutions that dismantle systemic and systematic racism in Fayette County. So as these subcommittees have been meeting, they have 4 guiding principles that they've been using in their meetings. Number 1 is to acknowledge that there is systemic racism. Number 2 is to ask questions. 3 is to address it. And then 4th will be the action that is taken. And so, as I said, these committees have been meeting for a while, and now we want our community to be involved. We are doing this with total transparency. And we cannot make Lexington a better place until all of us realize that we have a part to play in this. And so our goals for this commission is to, as I said, identify both systemic and systematic practices of racism, which has fostered structural inequalities, challenges, and deficiencies in Lexington, Fayette County. Assess the historical marginalization of African Americans in this community. And last but certainly not least, recommend and advocate the systemic changes that will protect and promote racial opportunity, diversity, equity, and here in Lexington. So tonight, 2 of our committees are here. We hope you will send in questions. We need to hear from our community as we continue the assignment that has been given to us. Thank you, Renee.
Thank you, Ms. Roz. And we know that the work is still beginning and it's in progress, right? So this is not a discussion about solutions necessarily right now. This is really an opportunity for you, the community, to send in your thoughts so that the recommendations that do come from this commission can best reflect what you would like to see. So we're going to dive right in. Let me introduce the panelists who you see already on the screen. Ms. Rosalind Akins, of course, you just heard from. Latoya Mayo, if you will just wave to folks so they can see you. They probably can see your name on the screen, but just in case they can't, she's the managing shareholder of Littler Mendelson. So thank you for being with us. PG Peoples, well-known face in Lexington, president and CEO of the Urban League of Lexington, Fayette County. Divine Karama, all of these are very familiar faces to you. Executive Director of Believing in Forever, Inc., and a phenomenal rapper, poet, and so much more when it comes to artistic expression. Sharon Price, who we know cares deeply about kids and families in Central Kentucky, Executive Director of Community Action Council. Thank you, Sharon, for being here. Anthony Wright, one of my good old friends, Account Executive of Harshaw Train. Thank you. And he has so many titles, more than that. We should say. So thank you, Anthony, for being here. And then last but not least, Mr. Daryl Thompson, who's the Equity Officer for Fayette County Public Schools. So we hope that you will send in your questions. Remember, I'm going to repeat the address for you to send those in, townhall@lexingtonky.com. All right, we'll let that settle. All right. Occasionally there might be some ghosts and gremlins that come in, and we'll usher them out as quickly as we can. Let me start with Miss Latoya and PG and Divine. I do want to, you all are on the racial equity subcommittee, which really seems broad and over encompassing and probably overwhelming. I'm sure you might feel that way. So how are you all looking to define racial equity, and what does it achieving it really look like? Have you been able to come to grips with what that charge really means?
That's an excellent question, Renee, and a great starting point on, for today's discussion. PG and Divine, if you guys don't mind, I'd like to jump in and talk a little bit about how we're trying to combat this very, very huge obstacle of defining racial equity. I think we're definitely able to do that, and we have a working definition in mind, but the true task of our committee will be actually accomplishing that objective. Right now, we've kind of, when we first met, we threw around terms like balance and access and opportunities. And as a group, we kind of worked together using those key terms in mind and kind of formulated what we believe that racial equity should at least be societal conditions in which there is an equal distribution of resources and opportunities that is neither determined nor predicted by race, racial bias, or racial ideology. We think that structure, systems, and practices and cultural narratives in society achieve racial equity when there is a true situational fairness and equal opportunity, when there is a democratic commitment to dismantle the false narrative of white supremacy and address the legal, political, social, cultural, and historical contributors that contribute to and come into play with respect to inequity. We believe that racial equity exists when families and individuals are able to thrive and flourish in the intersections of all aspects of their identity, including race, religion, gender, orientation, ability, and socioeconomic background. We also believe that racial equity will exist when those of our communities, the most vulnerable members of our communities in society have access to mechanisms to achieve social mobility and a voice in naming their reality, describing how these systems of oppressions play out, and also developing solutions which draw upon their unique skills and assets. Finally, we believe racial equity will exist when all people, cultures, and identities are equally valued and recognized under the belief that strength comes through the diversity and expression of our shared humanity. So that's our definition. Now, how do we get there? And so with that, I'm going to pass that to PG and Divine.
I should have mentioned, PG, before you start, that Latoya and PG are vice chairs of the Racial Equity Subcommittee. So excuse me for not mentioning that earlier. That's why she knew exactly how to start it off. And so PG, she's over to you now to pick up.
Well, let me just add to that by saying, the easier question for us to answer is, what is racial inequity?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're a lot more familiar with that than asking us being able to tell you what racial equity looks like. We have not seen it enough to know what it looks like, and every time I think we feel like we're getting close to that when you have legislation passed like affirmative action and so forth. The other side figures out a way to negate it or figure out a way to make it difficult to achieve that. So that's why that's always the tough question. My co-chair there, I think did a great job putting that in perspective and telling you what giving you our evolving definition. And we also be interested in hearing from the public more about that whole definition of racial equity, because it's interesting depending on, it has a lot of different angles depending on who you talk to.
Right. And so how important is city investment, and even beyond the city and county, all levels of government and even private investment? How important is financial investment into the goal of racial equity that is still moldable in your view right now, PG?
It's critical. Investment, the government at all levels need to be investing. Let's just talk about the racial equity with as far as the pandemic is concerned. You know, government needed to put extra resources so we could do more testing in Black neighborhoods because of the fact that now that the scab has been pulled back. The true story about previous inequities in healthcare and health delivery are out there for all us to see. So how do you fix it? You fix it by having the government and the private sector people make contributions to the works that have to be done to balance things. My co-chair talked about balancing, and that balance is what we are trying to get to. If we ever get to some of that, we'll be on the way.
So as LaToya mentioned, balance, access, and opportunities. And Divine, I want to ask you, oftentimes in these conversations, it takes a programmatic direction. Well, if we just do A, B, C, and D program or activity or initiative, we'll get there. But many people are wondering, well, first of all, are those programs a success that have already tried to get at systematic and systemic racism? And is that the only way to achieve it? Is it just more programs, more activities to get to that goal? What do you think?
I think it's all of it. I just think we are at a time in our history that I don't think it's either or. I think we need everybody in the fight from the top down. I think, having people in certain rooms, having people of color with certain influence, and the ones that do get access and taking advantage of those opportunities to try to change policy and get those programs implemented is important. And we definitely need that. But I know, being a nonprofit person, I also see that there's a lot of work that could be done from the ground up. So while we are working to change policy and we are working to change things from the top down, there's a lot of work, a lot of service that we can do from the ground up. There's a lot of things, curriculum wise, that I would love to see changed as far as just the information that young people are learning, about systemic oppression. But while we're fighting for that, that's an opportunity for nonprofits, to open up freedom schools or, to do Saturday programming. You look at Carter G. Woodson, that started through the BMW program, and look what they've been able to do and establish. And I think that's just a good example of the work that can be done from the ground up. So I'm just a person that believes we got to hit it from all angles. I'm a basketball guy. You got to have the guy that can rebound, the guy that can shoot, the guy that can pass. And when you put them all together, that's when you're able to win a championship. And I feel like with this fight, everybody has a role to play. The educated, the non-educated, service level, everybody has a role to play. And I think that's the way that we should target this. And I think that's the way that Lexington has been hitting this the last several months.
PG,
Renee, may I step in?
Oh, yes, go ahead. I want to too.
You know, I'm one of those people, and I think our committee, for sure, we believe in finding best practices, and if it's working, replicate it. So one of the best practices I want to share, and I've shared with my committee, that is just emanating, is a practice that I know that I'm involved with Coach Calipari and with the coaches all over the country, and with the McClendon Foundation. Those of us who know Coach McClendon was to HBCU, to black basketball what Adolph Rupp was to white basketball. Coach McClendon was one of the best. And so there's a foundation out there now that strives to get more African Americans into administrative roles in athletic departments. And what we've initiated is Coach Cal has started a program for this year. He's going to fund positions to work for graduate students to work in UK's athletic department. And these will be paid work experiences. We're not talking about internships, paid work experiences. And what we're trying to address here is a systemic issue of underrepresentation that's been caused over the years by systemic racism. That's how you make a difference. Is someone has to say, we need to do this and step forward and make the contributions. I am excited about this potential. I know there are about 39 national coaches who will be participating, and what the coaches will do is, out of their foundations, they will help fund the work programs for the individuals. 10 years from now, we will have certainly made an impact on that void, because most athletic departments have minimal representation of African Americans, while on their fields and on their courts, they're 80 to 90% Black.
So how do we replicate what is happening in athletics into other sectors? You know,
I think the same concept can be done in every college.
And that's what
every college on campus.
That's right. Yeah. And even in other sectors, right? Because we know that the boardroom is where the policy is made, and you have to have a place at the table, right? Right. And so that's a conversation about dismantling systemic racism, about how do you get in the rooms where the decisions are made, as someone recently wrote, in the room where it happened. How do you get in the room where it's happening? This question I want you all to vet. And this comes from someone watching: considering capitalism requires the exploitation, and this is a quote, of people, land, and resources, how do programs and funding dismantle the systemic and systematic racism of the hegemonic, heteropatriarchal, white imperialist power structure, end quote. Any takers? You want me to call on you? PG, you're up.
Oh, wow. Touch that again for me.
So if you're thinking about the system of capitalism, right? Okay. The system itself, I think this person is getting at, and what in their eyes capitalism does in a negative way. How then can that, what they perceive as negative, be used to undo the already negative, right? Do you see what I'm saying? How can it be used to undo a system if it's created in this person's mind by, and they're just saying white men, that's what she means. How do you get at undoing that structural racism and disrupting that power structure to get to racial equity? How can you do that when capitalism is first and foremost? I'm interpreting, but I believe that's where she's going with this question.
And so capitalism in this case is bad. Is that what I'm not sure if I'm getting it.
Let me take a shot here.
Okay,
I'm not quite sure I get it, but I will at least try to address it, because I do live and work in corporate America and have done so for 24 years. And I mean, I think all of us understand that we live in a society, in a capitalist society. And at the end of the day, we all need dollars to continue to live and maintain. With that being said, I think Devon made a very good point earlier when he says that it takes an attack at all angles. And we may be able to look at nonprofits and other volunteer organizations to help outside of the capitalist society to help achieve racial equality and equity. But within corporate America, and given the true nature that the dollar does run most of America, that we can work within the corporate system to change, to bring about change. I, for one, go piggybacking on what PG said earlier, you know, how do we take ideas that have worked in the private sector or that work in the athletic sector and move those over in the corporate sector where we can impact dollars. I think it would be, you know, remiss of us to suggest that as a committee that we can change people's intent or behavior or racist intent or heart. What we can change is their conduct and the rules in which they operate in that realm. And what I see here is, like my grandmother used to always tell me growing up, baby, we don't have control over the game. We can understand the rules and play to win. Right, and I think you bring that same approach to a capitalist society, and that's an approach that I've always brought to a corporate society. I know what the rules of the game are. I know what oppression I may face as a part of that capitalist or corporate society, and then I play accordingly. With that being said, I don't lose who I am or the nature of what my true objective is for my people. And I bring all that just to suggest that within my own corporate America, we've implemented what we've called the Rooney Rule. Whereas within the labor and employment sector of my firm and with my partners and shareholders, before a shareholder can open a new matter, they have to check a box and answer to the fact of whether or not they have talked with a person of color, and ask that person of color to accept that matter. Those are types of different small approaches that may bring about more African-American attorneys at the table, in the room, making those decisions that do otherwise undermine systematic policies or implicit biases and racial ideologies that continue to come at play in corporate America.
Roz, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, you know, the idea of capitalism, I think from the question they were asking was, you have a system of the haves and the have-nots. And it's about creating access to wealth that everyone has the opportunity to aspire to wealth and to have the dollars. It shouldn't be that the majority of the money is in the hands of the few. With equal access, by getting rid of systemic racism, capitalism can be for everyone, but it should not be a system of the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. I do want to ask a couple more questions when we move on to education and economics, and then maybe just kind of do round robins. As we all know, commissions aren't a new idea. And oftentimes when there's been some disruption in our daily lives or in how we're used to doing things, that's the knee-jerk reaction, is to create a commission. And there's a saying in Frankfurt, our seat of our state capital, that when you want to delay action, you form a blue ribbon task force and a commission. And there are many people who are probably doubtful that something productive, transformative, and sustaining will come from this effort. And so, you know, PG, I want to ask you, judging by what you've been involved in past organizations, past reports, past blue ribbon commissions, how can you build on that work that you've spent decades doing to move you along so you're not going back to square one and answering the same old questions 30 years ago?
Well, I agree with you that there are a lot of people who doubt and question the value of commissions and boards and so forth. And rightfully so, because there have been numerous ones over my career that end up being nice dust collectors once they were put in reports. But let me talk about one that I know that we implemented here in this community that has paid dividends for years. That's the Equity Council. You know, it came about as a result of the constant civil wars, and I refer to them as civil wars. That was whenever we were dealing with busing, moving kids from one side of town to the next. I mean, our town just came apart, and there was so much divisiveness. So thus came about the Fayette County Equity Council, where this group was put together to look at equity issues and then report those directly to the board. And over the years, I know that it has been beneficial. Daryl may speak to that in as much as that's his role now. But I would say to you that the Fayette County Equity Council that started as a committee, as a commission, has been helpful. One of the things that we did when we finished that report and before we turned it in to the board was we had kind of a closing remark that said to the commission, to the board and to everyone in the community that we want this to be the last time that we go through this kind of exercise. Mm-hmm. We want this one to sustain itself. And I think it has.
Okay. We do have another question. Let me bring it up. This one from Stephen Overstreet. The question is, most of the people of the African-American community who grew up in Lexington can agree that Micro City as a program worked well for our children. Right. It taught young Black kids how to get, manage, and keep employment. Why have we never looked into, is this question, bringing a program like that back?
Well, I'll speak to it. Not only Micro City, what we're talking about, let's talk about the closing of the Mayor's Training Center.
Yeah.
Both of those programs paid tremendous benefits to the urban core. Both of those programs were our pipeline to the streets and to the young African Americans, and both went away. Why they haven't come back? Because every time you bring the name of either one of those up, it becomes difficult because they have been demonized as concepts. And here's hoping that just talking about it tonight, some people get guts enough to say we do need to do that again.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to chime in on that? I do want to talk to Divine just for a moment about getting the youth voice included. You know, this is part of your life's work, is building up strong men, strong women, and building a future generation built on hope and ability. So I'm curious what you think about how the commission's work is going about including that critical voice and whatever recommendations come out.
Sure. I think that is something that at least our subcommittee is pivoting towards, trying to get the youth voice involved. Just one thing I've noticed is just the information gap in between individuals like ourselves who are blessed to be a part of this town hall, who are well versed in a lot of the issues that we're talking about. But there's a huge gap between us and then the everyday working folk or the young people or those that are underserved. And in any movement, you got to kind of have the power of the people. And I think what I've seen in Lexington as far as the youth is they were so emotional at the beginning of this. And oftentimes emotion doesn't sustain throughout for the long game. So once that emotion's gone, a lot of the young people kind of lose that energy because they don't have the information. They know that their parents are broke, their grandparents were broke, and their great-grandparents are broke, but they don't know why. They're angry, they're upset, but they don't know the complexities of the issues that they're even fighting for. So I think it's up to those of us that do understand what is going on or understand what is going on. And we got to pass that buck down to our young people so that they're informed, because that's what will sustain their energy. One of my favorite quotes is a rapper, Common. He said in the song Glory, you know, we need the wisdom of our elders, but our young people's energy. So we got to be able to close that gap between the energy of the young people who are ready. But we have the wisdom. And oftentimes we're so focused on the top, we're getting in these rooms, like you said, and we're doing these town halls, which this is great. But we can't forget the young people who just don't know the stuff that we know. And we got to inform them so that they can come right behind us and even join us with all of their energy and their social media, and they know how to get the messaging out and everything. So that's kind of what we're pivoting to and focusing on with our subcommittee. And we got to be open. We got to be able to use hip hop music. We got to be able to use spoken word. We got to be able to use Instagram, TikTok. we got to meet these young people where they are and let them get the information out how they get it out, but we got to get them the information. So that's something I'm personally focused on.
I like that new word that you use, Divine, overstand. I like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Instead of overstand, I like that. Get that in the dictionary. I want to pivot now. It's a perfect place to pivot toward education. And I want to start with Sharon because she's done a lot of work in this area, helping families, boosting families and strengthening minds of children and early childhood development. And I just want to ask you, because you are one of the vice chairs for the education economics, Anthony Wright, probably is you're heavy on the economics and you're do the yeoman's work on education. That's a good pairing. I want to ask you what you've identified educationally as the greatest challenges and at all levels, right? From early childhood education all the way through matriculating through post-secondary even adult learners.
Okay, so first I want to thank you guys for having us here tonight and having us present the voice of the community and the concerns that we've already heard from those in the community. But I'm going to be about that birth to 5, and then I'm going to rely on Daryl to help me out and pull it on in. But when our subcommittee was thinking about the barriers that present itself, there was no way to look at racism without looking at its relationship to poverty. You know, it's impossible to discuss breaking barriers of racism without focusing on the people, you know, who are living in poverty, since poverty is one major result of racism. And so, Renee, you know, as an educator and advocate for children under 5 years old, we know how important those first 5 years are to a child's development, you know, socially, emotionally, cognitively, all of those things are important. But one of the things that hit home for us was with our guest speaker, Dr. Jennifer Grisham Brown from the University of Kentucky. She called social emotional competence the major predictor of future success in kindergarten and for children in school. And so with that, from the very beginning, early childhood education was a priority for this committee. And how do we increase access and full day, high quality education when funding is a challenge? And when funding is a challenge, what else can we do? What recommendations can we make? What can we bring forth to help strengthen this? And so instead of us looking at the school districts and Head Start and private childcares all independently and in isolation of themselves, we begin to look at it intentionally as a systematic and complete system for Fayette County for educating our youngest children. And also utilizing that whole family approach, and Daryl's gonna hone in on that because you need that entire family in order to teach that child. And so knowing that where children live and where they learn matters. And so for our committee, this means developing a research and development plan with the district that will create a collective impact framework for offering full day preschool and increasing quality teaching and learning in our neighborhoods. But Renee, that's not all, there's more to it. So in addition to that, what we're proposing is also going to increase the economic empowerment of minority small businesses. So those child development centers that are in those communities. So simply put, what we're suggesting is that all systems come together and layer their resources and human capital and supports to help cultivate an environment that not only provides high quality early childhood instruction, but it also increases the quality of the facility and that small businesses infrastructure. We want to do both things. We want to educate children, we want to build families, and we also want to build those businesses that are in those communities so that the children that are in those child development centers are receiving high quality care while they're there.
Right. And we know is important. Yeah, Daryl Thompson, the equity officer for Fayette County, jump in here and talk about that whole family approach in education.
And that's great. And I appreciate you all for having us today. And as Sharon mentioned, we've talked about a multi-generational or dual generational approach. We cannot attack this, as Divine has mentioned, from one dimension. We have to come at all angles. And part of that is ensuring that the family, the whole family, is receiving the support. If you look at the travesty that exists in some of our communities, we mentioned the concept around where children lives matter and where children learn matter. It's a travesty to go 1 block or 1 mile away from one community into another community, and only 21% of those students show up ready for kindergarten. While you go another block, 82% of the kids that go and come from one community are ready for kindergarten. That does not make any sense when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so our goal is to ensure we remove those invisible lines to ensure that equity across those pathways are granted to all families. And so, as Sharon has mentioned, that starts also with the family at home. If we can raise up and revitalize the home, we will have more children coming out of those households that are ready for kindergarten. That is the root cause of the achievement gap. People like to talk about the achievement gap, and that's when we assess students when they arrive to the schoolhouse door. That gap actually starts at home, birth to 3, birth to 5. And so we've got to attack this at the root cause if we want to fix this going forward. We know that students are given high quality early childhood, have a better trajectory for being successful in their careers. And so our goal, again, is to ensure that the family, along with the students, have access, opportunity, and inclusion. So on the other end of that, we've got to have safety net supports and anchors in place as they matriculate across the K-12 system. But when they get out of that, what is it they're prepared for? We've got to have them ready to go into career and or to college. But how do they get to college when college is now a big business? So we got to remove barriers on the back end that gives students access to not just enter college, to also exit. Because again, we have plenty of them go in and not a whole lot of them come back out. But let's talk about teaching when it comes to competencies. We talked about that earlier, competencies around social and emotional learning. We also got to have our workforce prepared and skilled in cultural competencies. That means they've got to be aware of everybody and anybody that's in those classrooms. We cannot have our system putting out a workforce they are not prepared to teach the students in front of them. And that's what we're facing when it comes to cultural competencies and culture responsive teaching and learning. And then lastly, we've got to have culture responsive leadership. If you don't have the leadership that's going to be pushing those type of competencies down through their buildings, hiring a diverse and inclusive workforce, you're going to get the same thing that history has taught us, this divided disparate treatment. So again, that's a little bit of touching it on the surface. This is not a 2-hour conversation. I promise you, it takes a lot of research and development to get to the core of what we have to do, because there is a science behind teaching and learning. It is not just putting anybody in the classroom with the wrong dispositions to handle our children. So we want to certainly bring those points to attention as we do our work and bring our recommendations to the mayor.
Thank you, Daryl, for that. And I think maybe Roz can chime in too. And I want you just to talk about teacher preparedness. That goes to the colleges of education, right? And what they're teaching those kids when it comes to social and emotional learning, having high expectations of kids regardless of color or socioeconomic status. I mean, is that kind of thing being taught? Can you teach cultural competency as an educational course for in-service, pre-service teachers?
To some degree, I think you can, but I'll be honest with you. Teaching is a calling. You've got to believe in your heart that you can do it. I'll be honest, I don't think I've taught a kid in my 42 years. I think I've only met one kid that I really could not get through to. And so it's truly a calling on your life. And if it's a calling, you will have those high expectations. You will not look at kids based on their addresses, where they come from. You're going to go beyond the call of duty to do whatever it takes to make sure that child learns, and you will create a culture and an environment in your classroom that is conducive for learning and will bring about that social and emotional learning.
Right. And that's why teacher recruitment is important in communities of color, right?
Right.
Like Call Me Mr. program at EKU that was trying to recruit Black men to teach those early levels of K through 12. So that's important. We know that the science tells us, I think, Mr. Thompson, that the benefits of having Black educators before any color classroom has enormous benefits for both African-American kids and kids of color and the majority population.
that is correct. And the early is even more important. It's the earlier we receive those. At the other part of that conversation is where do we get them? You know,
Right.
we talk about workforce pipelines. We've got 6, 7 people here on this call. And if we were all to ask each of us to identify 3, 5 Black males that they know that are educators, I promise you we probably won't come up with 15 right now, right off the top of our head, because we do know society in itself, we talk about access, inclusion, and pathways. Our young people today have far more opportunities than we had 20, 30 years ago. And teaching just does not seem to be the profession that we have promoted. That's the other part. Well, we have not promoted our own skill and industry as one of the most viable and most important jobs that you can have. And so we failed as an industry of our own by not promoting education to our young people early and getting them back into our classroom. In order to get Black teachers, minority teachers in the classroom, we've got to have them in the pipeline. That means when they go to school, they got to become teachers. When they exit school, they got to get hired as teachers. And so our issue is not that we don't have high quality ones. We don't have enough. We don't have enough in the pipeline. If you look at the data across all of our universities, all the way from the university, all 8 state institutions, we're not putting out enough minority teachers to even supply the workforce across the state. And all those teachers don't stay in the Commonwealth. So we're competing against other states that need the same type of workforce diversity. So again, we've got to do our own, fix our own problem. That is by encouraging teachers, Blacks and minorities, to become teachers, and then ensure that they have success when they go into the programs. And we can talk about this at another time, but what are those barriers from the ACT to the Praxis test that continue to be barriers to getting those students into colleges of education? So those are some of the things we've talked about in our committee, removing barriers so that we can have more access into the workforce. And then how can we ensure those individuals come out are gainfully employed so we can see those Black and brown faces in the classrooms.
And
So there, go ahead.
Renee, one of the aha moments, because we've had a couple of aha moments during our committee meetings, and one of the aha moments that we had was when we were discussing, you know, the school districts recruiting and hiring more minority teachers, and Black teachers specifically. And we were talking about all of that, but what Jennifer Grisham Brown told us is that, hey, that's not your problem. The school district is never going to be able to recruit and hire minority teachers if we can't first get them through the education system. And she named the Praxis exam as being the most single barrier to students going into education, because if you can't pass that test, which she called culturally biased, then before you can even enter the College of Education, you know, you're turned away from it. So even if we do that recruitment and, you know, making sure that we're trying to get people to go into the field of education, if they get stopped by a test going into their junior year of college, we're never going to see the results that we want if we have culturally biased tests in place that are eliminating and preventing Black and Latinx from being able to go into and finish that field.
So that's one of the structural answers, right? Get away from those standardized tests like that. We've had similar discussions about college entrance exams, ACT, SAT, that those have some implicit bias, that they don't connect to kids of color, that they're written in a way that's not part of their everyday environment. Roz, I want you to think you were going to say something, man.
Yeah, I'm learning through BMW. We're going to have to grow our own teachers. So we have 2 young men right now who are planning to go into education, who've come through BMW, started as middle schoolers. They're now going into their junior year of college, praying now that they can pass the Praxis test. But that is what we're doing now. We're trying to grow our own teachers, and we're giving them experiences on Saturday working with the elementary kids in BMW. And developing those skills with them on Saturday, so it'll be easier for them and they will make great teachers.
Good point. Kudos to BMW and all the work that you've done, Roz, for your 40 years. We have this question from Diane Cashin, who works at the Bluegrass Community and Technical College. She manages English as a second language program that serves refugees and immigrants who are attempting to better learn the English language. Her first question, she's got several, so we're not going to get to all of them, I don't think, but First one is, given the current circumstances under the pandemic, how do we level the educational playing field for children of immigrants, refugees, and other low-income families, or those on public assistance, when they do not have, one, adequate numbers of devices? So internet accessibility, we've talked about, there's a lot of conversation about where internet needs to be a universal basic utility. Adequate digital knowledge, so they need literacy in that area. And they share a home with children who are in Fayette County Public Schools who are competing for devices and who don't understand and navigate the programs required for participation, several other things. So what are your thoughts about those? Mr. Thompson, I'll let you chime in.
So our district has addressed this issue and been very intentional, given the fact that we've had to shift our delivery system for educating, knowing that equity is a component, particularly when poverty plays a large part in ensuring people have access to. And so the digital divide has been top of mind for us as we move to this new learning platform. And by doing so, we've gone one-to-one across all of our schools with digital devices, ensuring that every student has a Chromebook and that households have Wi-Fi. We bought hotspots and will continue to buy hotspots as we move into the next school year to ensure that those households have the necessary digital devices. Additional to that, though, is that the language barrier is one of the biggest issues when it comes to 94 different languages, native languages spoken in our school system. We have highly skilled educators, but we don't have them across every single geographical footprint of our district that are able to communicate across the language barriers. But we have instituted systems such as the language line that allows those families to be able to tap in and have translation done. We've hired several hundred contracted translators to also support those families in those households. And so given that, in my office, I'll use my office as an example. I have an office that supports family community engagement across the district. I've been very intentional about ensuring I have a diverse workforce that has different languages spoken. When I took this job 10 years ago, there were nobody in the district other than one person who spoke Spanish at district office. I have 3 in my office now that's able to communicate across families and multiple languages. And so the district has been very, very intentional to ensuring that we're hiring staff with language as an intentional component to their skills and competencies, not just language when it comes to technology, but the ability to speak and communicate and write and even translate to those families in need. And so kind of hit some of the points I think that are intentional about a systems approach for how we're addressing it. But the part of that becomes a community-based initiative as well. We have those families for 7 hours a day. So what happens on the 17 hours that they're in the community? And so there is some shared accountability that takes place. And so we can cover the 24-hour space of ensuring families have what they need when they leave school and go into the homes.
And I would, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Devon.
Well, I was just gonna just follow up on what Daryl said. I think that's where the community's got to step up. Different nonprofits, different service organizations got to fill those gaps because I'm sure Roz, Daryl, everybody knows that a child is at its best when it's the school, the parents, and the community can kind of come together with that child in mind. So again, that's just an opportunity for the community to step up. And I had a question for Daryl too, just kind of from my own knowledge. I saw a meme recently about equity, the difference between equality and equity. So for some of our immigrant students who have those language barriers, they got to go maybe through several extra steps just to be able to complete assignments or do things that other students are doing. Is that somehow weighted in how they're graded, and how we reward their performance because they have to go through those extra steps that other students might not? And again, I'm just kind of curious how that works.
So the first part of that would be a no, and then I look like Ms. Aikens going to say something, so I'm gonna let her speak, and then I'm gonna follow behind her.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ms. Aikens.
It all depends on the teacher, but when students have real challenges, like with language or whatever, it's no difference than having a kid who has the services of special education. If they have an IEP, which is the individual education plan, accommodations are made so that student can be successful in the class that they're taking. Most of those kids have an IEP, an individual education plan, and teachers do make accommodations for those students. So first of all, they can have some self-worth, feeling like they've accomplished something. And at the same time, they're not penalized because they don't have the experience in English as someone else might have.
And so I'll follow back up with a couple of little keywords that I'll use because adequate and sufficient has to be a part of all of our students' learning. That they get adequate supports, that they get adequate accommodations, but more important, that the teachers in front of them believe. All right, that's the biggest contributor to whether or not anybody gets whatever they want or need, is whether or not you believe and to believe that I deserve it. All right. So that's what we work on, is ensuring that our teachers believe in every single child. If you believe that, you're going to make sure that every child has adequate and sufficient everything, not just devices, but food when they go home. Make sure their lights are on when they go home. Make sure they're clean and appropriate when they come back. And so adequate and sufficient are the two words that I'm going to use, Divine, to respond to that, because at the core of that is that all of our teachers have to believe in every single of our child. And all of the needs that they have. That is the equity. When all of that is happening in unison, we know we've reached the equity and equality because they're getting exactly what they need.
Good. Thank you, Divine, for that good question. Really good. Diane had another question about how you can make internet a basic utility. The answer to that is you write your congressperson, you write the Federal Communications Commission, and you get on them, because this has been an issue that's been stirring in Congress for many, many, many years. And so that's how that happens. That's a federal issue that has to be addressed there, but it's a good question. We had a question, Shambra Mulder asked, and I can answer this, and Roz Akins can answer this. Why doesn't this panel include all the members of the commissions? We want to hear the perspectives of all of them. That's coming, Ms. Roz, right? That you can't do everything in one night, and we realize that, so there were dissectable chunks here to get at this.
That's right. So tonight we're doing 2 of the 5. Thursday night you'll have health disparities, and then you will have next Tuesday the last 2, which is housing and gentrification and law enforcement. And because we narrowed it down to 3 from each of the committees, but all of the commission members are listening tonight. And so they are available if you have questions or something that you want to give to one of them. They are all listening in, but we wanted to just chunk it, and we wanted an opportunity. If we had all 5 at the same time, we would not be able to answer all the questions.
We did guilty weekend.
And can I piggyback on that response, particularly in the fact that we couched this whole thing about acknowledging racism. And racism does not discriminate against most of us unless we don't look like we look. But if we were ask each other what was our actual ethnicity, some of us may say we're African, some may say we're Indian, some may say we're Asian. And so the question that's been asked to me is why wasn't this group made up of a more diverse group of the ethnicities that racism actually includes? Not to exclude the fact that Blacks have been historically and disparately mistreated. But if we as a commission, as a mayor leading a city, is going to be intentional and inclusive, you cannot leave out parts of the community that is Black and brown. We're not saying you leave out the whites either, because they may not identify as Caucasian. But when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, if you're going to couch your title and your commission, you cannot be intentional. You may be unintentionally exclusive if you're not intentionally inclusive, all right? And so by that, if I look at this picture right here, by definition, we may be discriminating because we don't have other people that are Black and brown that also had racism as a part of their experience. So I would say that to the mayor and the commission, that if you're going to be intentional about racism, you can't leave people out that racism has also impacted. Not excluding the fact that Blacks have been historically most mistreated. That's not what I'm saying. But if we're going to be intentionally inclusive, we've got to be intentionally about ensuring Latinx and other ethnicities that are Black and brown have been discriminated against like this are included as well.
So I want to hear, LaToya, I was going to ask if you had a response to that, being on the racial equity. It's a very good question. and I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, we actually talked about that among our subcommittee members, and we do have subcommittee members that are people that don't identify as African American, but do identify as people of color,
Yeah.
as well as Hispanic members of our subcommittee, and that was a recurring theme. And I think you're absolutely right, Daryl. When you're talking about racial equity, there has to be a focus on every marginalized group that or equity. There has to be a focus on every marginalized group that faces some sense of oppression on the basis of their color or their protective category. But as I understood, the purpose of this particular task force was to address African Americans who are now in today's time at the forefront of the media, being kind of shown in a in the spotlight right now in the present times of being a marginalized group that is really facing a traumatic time period right now, and where our focus just at this point is to address that specific group. But there is I don't think it was ever any intent to exclude the overall purpose of finding equity solutions for all marginalized groups.
And I agree with that, because that's where I think the issue has gotten conflated when it comes to those people who aren't on the commission or aren't on the are not a part of the subcommittees. When they look at the overarching goal and objectives of this, the overall commission, the questions that's been asked to me is how did this become all of that, when at the core of this, when it was about racial injustice as a result of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and the things that happened. So how did we get to all of this, and how did we get to allow this to be conflated into all of this discussion? And at the core of that was that. And so I didn't want to misguide my statement by thinking, okay, we got to have all these other pieces and parts of our fabric included, which they should be. But at the core of this, we were talking about the mistreatment of Blacks in our community. And so didn't want us to lose sight of that, even though that question's been asked to me multiple times. How did we get to that, when that's at the core of this was those issues? So I'll stand my ground on that.
Right. And Anthony, I want to get you and PG to weigh in too. It's kind of like the argument about saying Black Lives Matter, right? Well, you're not saying that just Black Lives Matter, but at the moment, the crisis is with the Black community.
That's
right.
That's right.
So
That's
Anthony,
exactly.
can you expound on that a little bit?
Well, I was just going to say that Daryl has done his job even on our subcommittee, because as he came to the first meeting, he challenged a few points that we made. And we talked about the kinds of things that we want to bring forward. We talked about MBE. He said, well, what about what about WBE? So no, this started as a result of a racial issue. And that's how we got to the table talking about this. So our focus should absolutely be on that, so that we can actually do justice to what's also been talked about in the community. I think that we are blessed on our committee. We do have two representatives from the Brown community as well, from the Latino, Latinx, and we're thankful for their input. And they're very clear about making sure that we don't leave that out in this discussion. So when you see us talk about MBEs, that includes Latinx, that includes Asian, that includes Indian, and it definitely includes African American.
PG?
Well, the thing that people are talking about with all lives matter, my answer to that is all lives do not matter until Black lives matter. Simple. Once Black lives matter, then all lives will matter.
That's a good way to put it. Daryl, did you have anything you wanted to add on that before we talk about the economy and economic issues and financial literacy, et cetera?
No, I think we've covered a whole lot in a short bit of time around, I guess what I would tell you, eyes being wide shut to this issue, and now they're being wide open. And I'm glad that those who have often had their eyes wide shut, either denied the existence of racism, now have an opportunity to participate and engage, and now are no longer complicit, because silence makes you complicit to the fact of racism. If you stand around and listen to your friends and your family make racist jokes, that makes you complicit to being a racist. So your silence at this point, and your ability to break that silence. I'm glad to see a very multi-dimensional approach to people attacking racism, as Divine mentioned. People from all walks of life, communities, ethnicities, cultures, backgrounds, ages, willing to take a sacrifice and take a stand for what's right and what's just. So I will close my statement with that, knowing that we have hope based on what we see and the actions that we see of the people in the street being more unified and more synergized around attacking this issue head on. So I do appreciate the community and what they're doing to make change happen for the future.
Right.
To the point, earlier we were talking about should the emphasis be on African Americans, should it be on Hispanics? So let me tell you, I think what's most important is that we not get caught up in that kind of debate and argument, because that's the oldest divide and conquer trick that's ever been created by man.
That's right.
So let's don't take that bait.
Right, right. And you know, I have to say this too before you ask a question, Renee. All of us, when we took this responsibility, when we accepted the call, and I don't just mean the phone call, I'm talking about the call to serve in this responsibility. We didn't take that lightly, because we said to ourselves, I know I said to myself as I prayed through the decision, is we have a unique opportunity now to right some things that we know are wrong. And whether or not everybody sees the same perspective on what we recognize as issues, if we don't seize the moment to actually do something with it, 20 years from now, you know, you say to yourself, I had a chance, but I didn't. And that's the last thing I want to be able to say. I want to say that hopefully 20 years from now, the work that we're doing today will make a difference in the lives of our people, and we'll recognize that as we sit back and look on our time. So I applaud everybody who's serving on this. And one thing that we've all recognized is, even though there's 5 subcommittees, every one of these is connected in some way.
Exactly.
The topic,
Exactly.
and there's certain themes running all the way through it. And at the end of the day, there is a racial issue that you have to accept. And so part of what we did even last week in getting data and information is that we documented some clear differences. And I hope that everybody who's watching tonight takes the time to go look in the Google Drive at some of the information that's there. It's a treasure trove of information, but it shows from an economic development standpoint and a business standpoint, even an opportunity standpoint, you can clearly see some differences. And you have to figure, well, if everything else being equal is here, why is the gap? And then you recognize and listen, we got to accept the fact that some people in their hearts don't have it to do the right thing.
Right.
And unfortunately, some of those people have been in leadership positions.
Right.
So they have an opportunity to not make sure that people move forward. So with that, I'm sorry, I want to just say that before you ask the question.
That's good.
Before we go on to that, and we're talking about accepting the charge, our committee has accepted this charge and they are all in on it. So much so that I'm receiving emails as this is going on. And one of our committee members is asking me for a point of clarification, that ELL students are not special education students. It's not a learning barrier. ELL students are given PSPs, which are program service plans, and this is a barrier for all ELL students face. Classroom teachers viewing their language learning as a disability accents discrimination. And so she wanted me to make sure that her voice was heard.
Absolutely right.
Great point.
Absolutely right.
Roz, I know you've been trying to make a point.
I wanted to share some good news while we're talking about this, and Daryl, to talk about Fayette County Public Schools, which is, it's amazing. 5 new schools got African-American principals, and 4 of them were men.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tribute to what our district is trying to do.
That's right.
In
That's right.
racial equity and making a difference. You know, 5 of these elementary, 4 of them were men, and that's something we need to applaud our school district for doing.
That's right.
And
Big-
and that and
Renee.
to support that statement, I mean, that doesn't just happen. All right, let's
Right.
be clear
It's
about that.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen,
Re-
and you have to give credit where credit is due. And leadership matters. Let's say
Yes,
that.
it does.
And so you've got different levels of leadership across our school district, and it's not equal. I promise you, it's not that. That would be saying that the mayors of all of our cities in America are equal, and therefore you're going to get the same results. So unilaterally, leadership does matter. And so when you've got intentionality in the hiring decisions,
Mhm.
and I tell my people, you can either have 3 eyes. You can either be important, influential, or impactful. And so if importance is pushed out of the way, influence and impact is there, you'll see the results like we just saw in some of these hires. And it was not done because they were African American. Let's make that clear.
Yeah, they were
They
qualified.
they were done because they were highly qualified and they were the best in the pool. They were the best in the pool. And so given that, you got to dispel the myth that they're not out there, that they don't exist, because that's been also part of the story, the false narrative. And so our goal is to not rewrite history and make all the principals in Fayette County minority. It is to reframe the story, though. We have to tell the story different than the conqueror told the story. The conquered have oftentimes been left trying to rewrite what the conqueror has told us. We're not going to settle for that anymore. We're going to rewrite, we're going to reframe the narrative. And so we know that we have these highly skilled and highly capable leaders out there, and we want to get them at the table. But the table has to be fair. The decision-making bodies that make those selections have to be fair. We operate under a system called CARA. CARE put in some statutes called 16345, which are SBDM councils that decentralize the hiring process. Those hiring processes give those local school bodies the authority to make decisions around who gets hired. In most of the cases that you saw these selections taking place in, there was only one SBDM council that made that decision. The rest of those schools were schools that have been taken over as a result of their status by the superintendent, who was able to put together a more diverse selection committee, who then led to that process. That process led to those outcomes. And so we can look at how this gets here, but it's not by just a happenstance that people now have an opportunity to get in front of the line.
And Daryl, to your point about SBDMs that Kara did bring about in 1990, I don't think we talk enough about their significance. And there's been lots of conversation about underrepresentation of minorities in site-based decision-making councils and on school boards. I always say that the most political office, elected office there is being on a school board. And so I think we've got to make sure that minorities run for those, that they get, you know, I think there's participation numbers that are required of minorities to be on SBDMs. And I know that several districts, maybe not Fayette County, struggle to meet those numbers. And so talk about that community responsiveness. And that's where it calls on all of us to put our hat in the ring to make sure we're part of the solution. There was another question.
Renee, can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
I just want to, going back to the early days of the Equity Council, I remember a few principals back, we were at the Equity Council, we were pushing him to have more African-American principals. And, you know, he eventually shared with us that he would put them in the final 3 and they would be sent to the schools and they were sent right back because that SBDM's mind was already made up that they wanted a white principal. No, so that's, those kinds of things, as hard as we work, we still have to be prepared to go up against those kinds of things. Because I think Anthony said just a while ago, everybody's heart's not in the right place when it comes to doing the right thing. So SBDMs, while designed to have decision making close to the ground, some of them are so political, and some of them are so got other issues. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, we understand what's not being said there. I hear what's not being said. Diane Cashin, who had the previous question earlier, she did want to just kind of follow up. And she says that although children have IEPs, most never close the gap. Equity is never achieved. Very few apply to BCTC, and even fewer are eligible for university because they do not do well on standardized tests. because of the language barrier that persists throughout K through 12. It is very similar, she goes on to say, to what was recently touched on, that the other 17 hours of the day are not addressed. Fayette County Public Schools can't carry 100% of the burden. And she just wanted to add that to the conversation. So any other follow-up on education? All right, we good there? So we've got 22 minutes left. So let's shift to talk about economic empowerment and business development and individual financial literacy and wealth building. Because I think the wealth gap is something that I hope that this particular sector, our subcommittee, is addressing. So Anthony, I'm going to throw it to you because you've been very involved with the Minority Business Expo since the inception, right? I mean, that's how I first got to know you.
Certainly attending, but not to the chair role until 2008, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And MBE has done a lot to make sure
Really?
that minorities are connecting to government contracts and getting in that mix. So talk to us about the successes, but where are there still some struggles that need to be addressed?
Well, yeah, certainly some systems have been put in place, what I think we really need. I remember back in the day when the MBE was, when just Milton Dehoney was at the CAO. And I remember being at a meeting where individuals in the crowd said, we want the mayor to get 10%, right? And that's a very noble, worthwhile thing. In fact, there's an ordinance on the books since 91 that actually says that. But in actuality,
10%, clarify what you mean there.
So a goal of 10%, to do 10% spend with minority businesses. And so what we find though is there's no way that the mayor can be in control of the purchasing decisions of all those individuals. You need to have systems in place. And so that was one of the things that we did, is certainly make sure that we brought it down to the division level when you actually do the purchasing. And now the question is, the community is saying 10%, that's not good enough. We want 15. And so our committee right now is in the process of revising that resolution that actually gives that 10% for DBEs, and also we're breaking out DBE to MBE, WBE, disadvantaged businesses, because it's easy to get all of that caught up in one number. What we want to make sure we're seeing is the 15% in the MBE area. And we've actually stated that very clearly because, quite frankly, that's what got us here, is a racial issue.
And so how do you define MBE again? How do you define that?
51% or more in decision-making and leadership of the organization.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So the subcontractor piece and the contractor piece, we've done a lot of work in the area of construction, particularly with the contracts and trying to meet the DBE goal and the MBE goals. But our committee is very clear that we need to open that up to all purchasing. And so that goal needs not just to be looking at whether or not prime contractors are hiring subcontractors at a 15% basis, but what about all purchases? And so we're looking at what the city spends money on, and then making sure that gets in the hands of our people to say, here's the opportunity now for you to actually go create a business. The other thing that we looked at very clearly is we looked at the economy, the nature of the economy here in Central Kentucky and Lexington. And we had that presentation again last week by Allison Davis over at the UK. Again, I encourage everyone to take a look at that information. It's very valuable information, that report that she showed. But one of the things that we see is, where are the growth areas in our economy? What are we strongest in, and where do we see future opportunity? Clearly, healthcare is a big piece. That's going to be a big piece of what we do. But obviously, agriculture is as well, right? So we also talk about tech businesses. We talk about agritourism. There are certain areas that we're going to emphasize in our report that we begin to do targeted and more development in these areas for minority businesses. Programs even from young folks, as we talked about agriculture and the fact that we have so many animals around here, but we don't hear a lot about African-American veterinarians. So can we put together some programs to get these young people thinking about, we've got Locust Trace as a real asset to our community and to Central Kentucky. Can we get veterinarians to come out of there? Okay, so that's just one example. The other thing that we recognize is there has to be some things that modify the behavior when we look at the contracting and the subcontracting. Minority businesses may be contacted, and this is a situation we've run into far too often, and told early on when submitting the RFP response that we will work with this particular MBE at a certain percentage. And there have been experiences where those MBEs were not contacted to continue to do the work. So what kinds of things can we put in the contracting language that give it more teeth? In addition to that, can we look at some creative ways with our tax code to incentivize those businesses who do the right thing? And that way it'd be more of a carrot rather than a stick. There's economic opportunity for them doing that. The end result is we get more MBEs getting contracts, and they get to scale, and they do more projects, and they hire more people. So you start to see the spin in the community. One thing that we do, and I think this is going to be a responsibility of that Euphrates group that the city is now working with. When we talk about recruitment of businesses, locating businesses from elsewhere here into Central Kentucky, we often use a number of tax incentives in order to do that. We need to be just as intentional in recruiting minority businesses that have scale, that do the work that we have led from the city and also from the private sector. Bring those companies into our community, and certainly look for those individuals who have a track record of working with smaller subcontractors and growing them up. All right, giving them an opportunity to become now the ones who can run jobs and run projects, right? So all of those things have to be in place. It's one thing to say we got a goal of 15%, but you've got to look at how you got to give yourself a chance to make it. Right now, they're just, we don't have an over concentration of businesses in the area where the city does a lot of spend. So we need to fix that gap, right? We also recognize that financial literacy is very, very important. As we talk about economic development, true economic development is wealth creation. You can't have it without creating wealth. And so that also means the wealth of the individuals. We need to talk more about financial literacy, not only to individuals through the school system, which we think is a wonderful way to do it, through that whole family approach, bringing financial literacy to the opportunity for the folks, not only the teachers and the administrators and the staff, but the parents, okay? But there are also things that minority businesses need to know from a financial literacy standpoint. There are tools and vehicles that larger companies use all the time to reduce their impact on debt and taxes, and at the same time, get higher wages. Those tools need to be taught to our MBEs. And I'm actually going to start doing that with some, because I think it's very, very important. That's how we get to where there's a wealth transfer at the time. And we actually have, when parents move off the scene, we've got young people who were blessed because they've made good decisions at the beginning. Okay.
Yeah. PG?
Yes.
I want you to talk too about economic development and in terms of getting more minority businesses involved. And I think too, I'd like to hear your comments on narrowing that wealth gap between communities of color and white majorities.
Anthony was speaking to, we need to grow more businesses, that's for sure. Because as Anthony mentioned, there are probably some areas where we don't have enough people who can compete. But the way you can address that is through what we refer to as strategic alliances. That's where you put together majority companies and minority companies, and like if it's UK will use their influence to encourage the strategic alliance. The minority company learns and grows and moves on. And so that's easy to be done. It's easy to be done. We did it when Mike Scanlon said we wanted to do more work get more minority contractors. Mike Scanlon said, okay, PG, you find me the minority contractor. The next Applebee's that I build, we're going to make that contractor the prime, and they're going to learn the way Applebee's do this. Frank Minifield's company came in and built 2 Applebee's. The Applebee's on Leestown Road, and I think one on Richmond Road. We did the same concept with a bank that was building some new banks. you bring the minority company in to work under the majority company, then they become, they move away from being subs and become general contractors.
Right.
It's simple when people commit themselves to doing the right thing. And then that's when you're talking about building the kind of wealth that passes down through generations.
Right.
And if I can
And
piggyback
intentional,
off
and
of
it's
PG's
intentional.
statements,
Right.
one of the things on from good faith estimates, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can now.
Okay,
Yeah.
that we've gone from good faith estimates that's in our policy structure to goals, have yet to go to requirement. Now that's the step that PG's talking about, those joint ventures that are required. That's a part of our business model.
Right.
It's not optional, and it's not just a reflection of commitment. It really is a reflection of the organization's value proposition to what it is they believe in. And if that's not a part of their DNA, you're not going to find it in their contracts. And so we talked about capitalism earlier, and how did that system of capitalism get here? This is how it got here. It got here through policy that exists in codes called the Model Procurement Code, for instance, that says here's how you have to do business if you're going to do business in the Commonwealth. We've got to look at those policy matters and ensure that those barriers aren't continue to keep minority businesses out of the profitability. We've also got to look at barriers around the bidding process, barriers around becoming bonded. There's a ton of businesses out there that don't have the capacity to even get bonded. And how can we remove those barriers for small and minority businesses? And then lastly, we at the Fayette County Public School System levied a 5-cent tax many years ago. PG was a part of that work. And so when those opportunities come before, well, we're using and levying those tax dollars to put infrastructures into our schools. We should have had or could have had requirements in there that said a portion of those dollars must be earmarked to ensure diversity and inclusion is a part of the work. And so we now have a lesson to learn and have learned lessons from the past that we don't have to repeat to ensure that if we do this work and do it right, we can put language in place that's more intentional to get minority business growth.
Now, what both of those gentlemen said is part of our document when we look at our desired outcomes that we want to present to the mayor. Model procurement code, taking a look at that, and also doing strategic partnerships, joint ventures, and the like. But we also got to make sure we know where the minority businesses are. And so one of the things that our committee is putting forward is a new vehicle, a vehicle that will identify all of the minority businesses and the different types of minority, as a matter of fact, as well, both written and online, because we know that changes. And so you've got to be able to keep that information fresh and keep it in front of folks. We also recognize that in this process of trying to get more minority businesses involved with the spend of the city, we have to do more intentional work in the development of our apprenticeships and trades. One of the things that report showed that Allison gave, she talked about the different occupations that are out there and the percentage of where African Americans are in things that we have done historically, but we don't have a lot of folks doing now, are things that building trades could be a great opportunity. So the partnerships, we're going to be talking about workforce development this week, but the partnerships that come into place with, BCTC, even apprenticeship programs where you learn a trade, but at the same time, you're paid and you get benefits.
Right.
Let's direct people to that if they have that aptitude, because we need that skill set in our community. So that's another thing that we've talked about in our report. And finally, to hit on that point that Daryl was talking about with mandates, we recognize that the goal thing, while goals are important, everybody needs goals. We need to do a disparity study, and that disparity study will give us the data, the statistics, and the issues that have come up that say we need to be firmer in what we do rather than just a goal. Now you're talking about mandates. Now you're talking about, set numbers that you need to try to meet. So that's another thing that's going to come out of our committee. I think that's another one of our high things that we need to get done. We've talked about a disparity study for so long, right, PG? How many years have we talked about it?
Oh, forever.
And
Every
these,
time I hear about it, they say it costs too much.
I was just gonna say, these are not inexpensive documents. I mean, the one that Cincinnati did, my understanding is that cost $1.7 million to put that disparity study together. But
And Ed
Cincinnati,
Holmes actually did one for Fayette County Public Schools about a year ago. So we
Okay.
did one within our system to ensure that we had the capacity to meet some of the goals when it came to workforce. So
Right,
it's a much
right.
needs. And so when you look at the disparity study, we have to define which disparity,
Right.
because that has to be clear. Not just saying how many of these we do have or don't have. Let's look at where those dollars have been going and historically who's been getting them.
That's
Really
a
what
study. I mean, you
Yes.
got to do that in the study. Absolutely.
Hey,
Divine,
Anthony.
trying to
Yeah.
get in.
Sure, Divine, go ahead.
Just real quick, I had a quick question because I'm kind of gap minded. So I think the information that you're talking about is great, especially for those businesses that are ready for transition and ready to take the next step. But I know just kind of working on the ground, we got a lot of really talented people that are not necessarily business minded. They got these hustles
Yeah.
that are incredible,
Mhm.
but they don't even know the basics, like how to start an LLC. There's
Yeah.
a lot of young people who are out of the school system, 19, 20, 21 years old. So they're missing some of those programs and knowledge that they could get in the school system. So they're kind of in that trap gap is where I call it, where they got an entrepreneurial spirit, they got the talent, but they don't have the know-how. Are there
Right.
any programs or anything that we could do to close that gap? Because I feel like there's a lot of power, a lot of potential money in some of these people that are out here hustling and doing things on their own, but don't even know how to start their own business. They don't know about business taxes. So is there anything we can do to close that gap?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because Renee, you started out talking about programs and there's a lot of solutions that seem programmatic. Well, in some cases, programs do make sense. And this is one of those situations where, things like that content we've done for years at the MBE, but maybe we need to do some more targeted programs through venues where you actually know where to get to them. They're not talking to us, right? I might not know who they all are, but if they're talking to you and you know where to take them, then we can definitely do that. So it's all about creating those linkages and those opportunities to communicate to the folks in the community. Here's where the opportunity is. Here's the things that you need to seize that opportunity. The other piece that we have to talk about that study also discussed with the presentation that Allison gave last week is capital. And what kind of relationships do you have with banking for funding to get started with not only your business, but your hustle? Your hustle still needs seed money. You got to get it started with something. So what we saw, even with the PPP.
That was sad.
Which was meant to be
Yeah.
something that helped people survive this situation. And the small number of loans that went out to African Americans. Now, there is a very large number, almost 4,000 that put unidentified. So it's really hard to determine what those numbers are. But the very clear difference is that we didn't get very many. And so those—
And what part did racism play in that? That's my question.
There you go. Could I put a finger on it? I don't know where it is, but I know it exists.
And let me say that we even need to go back to our young men who are in, and back on what you're saying, Divine, even these young men as they graduate, everybody, that's my biggest thing that I've learned as an educator. Everybody is not going to college.
Right.
You can make a great career.
That's right.
With HVAC, electrician, and like you say, they have those gifts and talents.
Yep.
There's a program now called the Building Institute. And I'm so excited. One of those who graduated this year from high school in BMW, he's going to the Building Institute. He didn't want to go to college. And he's going to go and do HVAC. And he's probably going to make more money within the next 5 years than some of those who went to college. But we really got to help those young men who have those gifts with their hands. There are other opportunities for you that you can do, the Building Institute. And now that we have some Black businesses in construction that are taking these young men under their wing as an apprentice, that they can be a part and learn the business and eventually have their own business.
That's right.
That's right.
Right.
Well, you all, this has been a really good conversation. We got about 3 minutes left. We're going to take it all the way to 8. I would like maybe Roz, that's just how it is, broadcast time, right? Roz, if I'm going to kind of throw it to you, I'm just going to say that, we are going to talk to a previous question about why aren't all these things happening at once? Well, health disparities is on Thursday. That's going to focus on the social, cultural, economic, and environmental obstacles in healthcare in Fayette County with African Americans. So we're going to talk about that then. And then on August the 4th, a week from tonight, housing, gentrification, and law enforcement. That's going to be a tough one to get in 90 minutes, but we're going to try. So it's important that I hope you've heard a lot of this conversation. I know there's been activity on social media. So, really provide that feedback online and help these committees do the work that you want them to do. So Ms. Ross, give us some final words of inspiration before we end.
Thank you so very much. Let me say that everyone who is participating on the subcommittees or chairs or Gerald and myself, we all prayed about this before we took on this assignment. And let me say what drove me to agree to the mayor's request of being on this commission is that I think about all the young men who are part of the BMW Academy, all of those I've taught all over the years. I want to sum it up like this. I want Lexington to be a better place for them.
Yeah.
Many of us, I have more days behind me than I do in front of me. So I want this to be a time that we can truly make Lexington, the community and the city, that I don't want all of my boys to say, I'm moving to Nashville, I'm going to Charlotte, or I'm moving to Atlanta. I want them to say, I can't wait to help my community. I want to come up right here in Lexington. I want to raise my family here. And so that sums it up. I want to be said that I was a good ancestor that made a difference.
That's right. That's
in
right.
the community. So we're serious about this. Dr. Smith and I have a meeting with the mayor on tomorrow to give her an update, but we're serious and we truly want some changes to be done to make Lexington a better place. Thank you.
Renee,
Thank you. And we know if it's going to get done, Roz Akins can make it happen. So.
do we have 15 seconds?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Second, sir.
When we are talking about systemic racism, oftentimes the people who don't want to hear about that say, you guys always want to blame everything on race. And my answer is, I will stop blaming it on race when you can show me that I cannot discount race as it being a factor.
Yeah.
Show me that. When you show me that, then I'll quit talking about it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all in the proof, right?
Right.
Well,
Right.
This has been a really good conversation, and the other panels have a lot to live up to. This was a very good start, and I hope the community of Lexington that you feel the same and give your feedback. And thank you, Roz, and thank you, Dr. Gerald Smith, too, for taking this on. And all you vice chairs and subcommittee chairs and committee members, thank you for your service to Lexington. We appreciate it. Everyone stay safe, wear your mask, and we'll see you Thursday night, 6:30.
Thank you, Renee.
God bless.
Thank you, Renee.
Great
Thanks,
job,
Renee.
Renee,
Thanks,
as
team.
usual.
Bye-bye. My pleasure to be with you.
You all really appreciate it.
Thank you.